Hi there, this is Erica Merrill, and I'm the founder of Perfect Legal Video. And I am ecstatic, as always, to have attorney Nicole Reeves Lavallee on the show this afternoon. We are talking about a topic that is not always on the top of everyone's minds. It's father's rights. And I think that a lot of the information you're going to find out today will surprise you. Thank you so much for joining us, Nicole. Welcome to the show. Happy Friday.
Thank you, and hopefully we can learn something that we've never even thought about.
I think we will. So let's start off with, that there's a lot of different types of relationships out there. And you know lots of divorced people. You help them get that way. But, most people probably know half of the people that have gotten married are divorced now, or they have kids with someone and they never got married. They never took that plunge. So, does it matter if the man is married to the woman or not?
Absolutely. Different rights for different relationships.
So, if I'm married, well, not me because I'm not a man, but if the man is married to the woman, what types of rights does he have?
So he's already presumed to be the father. So he already has that right. His name is already going to be put on the birth certificate. And if and when they separate or they file for divorce, he has the exact same rights as the woman. They are equal. They are starting on equal footing, which is probably the only time that's going to happen, because in all these other scenarios, your rights are different based off of what that relationship looks like.
So let's make this a little like one step more interesting. What if it's a same-sex married couple of men? What are the rights like then?
Well, that's going to be a little more tricky. So the question is whether or not they adopted this child together, assuming that they both legally adopted this child during their marriage and both of their names are on the marriage certificate. Then again, they have the same rights. They're going to start out on equal footing. However, if one of them is the biological father and the husband has not adopted that child, whether it be that, we don't know how that occurred, but say that happened, then what's going to end up happening is that other father, who is not the legal father of this child, really is going to start out as not being the legal parent and is going to have virtually no rights unless and until he goes into court and exercises those and gets those rights through a court order.
Wow. And so, it sounds like that could be the start of a very sad situation for that father that doesn't have the rights right away. It feels a little similar to grandparents' rights, where you are absolutely in love with this kid and you have no rights to visitation or parenting time, as they like to call it.
They will give you a little bit of a de facto parenting versus a grandparent's rights, because obviously, assuming this child is 5 years old or whatever their child's age is, and you've bonded with that child, then obviously you are acting as a de facto parent. You're a parent in place of actually being a parent, and that's what de facto means. So you will get some rights, but you got to jump through hoops, and you're also going to have to file a complaint in equity to get any of those rights. It's not automatic, because again, in that divorce situation, that same-sex couple, you've got no legal rights at this point.
Wow. And that sounds like a situation where you need Nicole. It's my opinion on that, because if you're having an issue out there, like, I like to talk to the audience occasionally and just say, look, if this sounds like something that's happening to you or someone you know, definitely give the law offices of Nicole Reeves Lavallee a call, because they are very down to earth and they know the ins and the outs of this subject. And as we continue on, you will see that it gets more complicated depending on which scenario we're discussing. So when I first started talking to you about this today, we said, hey, does it matter what are the rights like if I'm married or if I'm not married? So one of the questions is, if you're not married, does that father have to put his name on the birth certificate?
Well, he doesn't have to, but he's going to have different rights as to whether or not he puts his name on that birth certificate or not. So if there's any question or no question that you're the father, then father, please put your name on the birth certificate, because you have really no rights until you do that.
Wow, that's a good point. I mean, like, if you don't have your name on there, then you have no rights. But I would think that some men might try to get out of paying child support by not putting their name on the birth certificate, or in some cases, even giving up their rights as a parent after they have put their name on the birth certificate later on. I mean, I personally know someone who went through a divorce. He was married. The kids are obviously his, and that was one of the tactics he wanted to use. Is that a viable tactic?
Well, everything is viable until it's not. So the simple fact of the matter is, if you're married, you're going to be presumed to be the father. So you better find somebody else and state some real reason why you don't think you're the father. And then you're going to have a genetic marker test or a DNA test. In a paternity case, when you haven't listed yourself as the father and you're saying, that's not really me, I don't know what you're talking about, for whatever reason, you don't want to be bonded with that child, you don't want to pay child support, you don't want to give up 23 years of your life, whatever the case may be. In those situations, then again, the mother has the right to come in and specifically ask for genetic marker tests. So great, you fought her off for a year, she went into court, she got the test. And if you don't take the test after 2 times of them attempting and they have a court order, they're going to presume that you're the father regardless. So you have to take the test. And obviously the test results are going to be the test results. If it comes back and it says you're the father, congratulations. Now you got to step up to the plate, whether it be financially, emotionally, or otherwise. And obviously if you're not the father, then we move on to potential father number 2. But that's basically how it's going to end up working, that really you can delay it, but it's inevitable. You will get your day in court. The results will be given. And at that point in time, you're going to have to live with whatever the results are.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like a soap opera, first of all, but let's make it a little more interesting even. So it sounds like this genetic marker test is really where you find out where the rubber hits the road. Are they going to need to pay child support? Do they get parenting time, whether they want it or not? Is it available to them? I mean, is that typically the case? It all comes down to that one test.
Obviously, assuming that they're contesting it, then yes, it's going to come down to that one test. And a lot of times before that one test, you don't get to have 2 bites of the apple. You don't get to say, hey, I want parenting time, but I don't believe that I'm the parent. No. You either believe it or you don't believe it. So we've had those situations where I want parenting time. Well, I don't want to wait 6 months for this test. Well, then admit you're the father. Well, I don't want to do that. So you are giving up those rights, and you're giving up, quality bonding time by, disputing it. But assuming you don't really have an interest in this child and you have no objection to waiting, then, putting all of that aside, once you get the test results, guess what? If you're the father, you now have rights. You have now been determined that you have rights. And then we're going to look at whether or not you should have joint legal custody. And it's probably going to end up happening. Again, we got to look at the facts and the circumstances. Mom obviously is going to have custody because you didn't even want to acknowledge that you were the child, the father of the child. So that's certainly going to happen. But yeah, you're going to get some parenting time. Now, whether you choose to exercise that parenting time is strictly on you. There are fathers that are head over heels and they say, oh my God, I can't believe it. And they're super excited and they want to spend every waking moment. And then you have other fathers that say, no, I'm really not interested in that. So it really kind of depends on what the father wants. But, depending on the age of the child, they are going to start it out slow and then gradually increase it. to a more traditional schedule.
That definitely is interesting, and I mean, you would hope that someone would want to have that relationship with their child. I have a child support question. Now, we know that with a marriage, there is a calculation, and when they're getting divorced, on what the child support should be. Is that different when you're not married?
Nope, it's the exact same formula. So the exact same worksheet applies. The only real, not even real difference, is going to be two things. One, if that gentleman happens to be married to somebody else and he has children with other mothers, then obviously we're going to put that child support number in there. And again, that works the same way with a divorce, but we may have to calculate it different because maybe he had two children born within a week of each other. And sometimes that does happen. So again, we've got to make sure that both mothers are theoretically accounted for on that formula, whether there's a child support order or not, because maybe he's living with one of them. The other thing is obviously in couples that are not married, chances are they're both going to have their own health insurance policies. Again, there's line items for both of those. But in a divorce situation, usually one parent is the only one that has the health insurance obligation. So those are kind of the differences, but overall it's the exact same formula, exact same responsibilities. But I will tell you, in a paternity case, the mother is allowed to go back to date of birth of the child to ask for child support. So if you want to fight this for 2 years and we finally determine that you're the father, congratulations, now you have 108 weeks of support in arrears. So it's just something to factor in. At some point that's going to catch up to you, and now you're already deficient, and now you're going to be paying penalties and interest on that arrears that you should have been paying 2 years ago, but you fought it. Just something to think about.
No, that is definitely something to think about. Here's another question. There's actually a couple more. Here's another question. I just love throwing these Maury Povich situations at you. So somebody gets divorced, and quite often, they've got kids with that first wife. Now it's an ex-wife, and then they move on to another person. They marry them and they have a kid with them. Does the child support change with the first kid?
Assuming their income is the same, then the answer is no, because that's the first child, and the first child should never get penalized for somebody having a second child. And that's what the child support guidelines say. After-born children don't have the same as first-born children.
So what if somebody never got child support from, like, say they got married, they had 2 kids with somebody, they never got child support after that divorce. The mom made more than the dad, and the dad lost his job, and then they just never got an attorney, and they just never fixed the situation. She's on her second marriage, has a second kid, has a third kid even, and then she gets divorced. How does it? Wait, what's the question though then?
What happens with the second child?
Okay, but it's a different dad.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, so what happens with the second child?
So the second family is going to have different rights. So the issue is going to be, under the child support guidelines, we're going to put in 0 because they have no prior child support obligation. So while they have 2 children in the first relationship, she's not going to get any credit for that at all. Then we go to the second family, and that second family, that person is going to pay full child support on that. Now, you kind of got to role reverse that a little bit, because again, if she was paying child support, so if mom was paying child support in the first marriage, then she would get a credit. But because she's not getting or receiving, there's 0 credits to be had on the child support worksheet.
Okay. And yeah, and we are doing this from the mom's perspective this time. But if it was a dad and he just didn't end up paying child support for the first kids, and he was married, but it just never happened, they never fixed it, and then he goes and he has a kid with somebody else, then the second mom is going to get full child support and the first mom gets nothing.
The second one is going to have a windfall, if you will, because there's going to be zero deductions for that first set of children.
Wow, that is very interesting. I don't think that of all the divorce attorneys that I've worked with, anyone has ever come up with this particular topic. I mean, the topic, but like this particular point is very interesting because, you know, nowadays everybody's got a mixed family. Everyone's moving on to their second family, and a lot of them are having kids again. And you end up with these meshed families with, you know, I don't know. It gets crazy out there. So it is definitely interesting to see how the child support works out when you have multiple kids and multiple moms. And what about requesting? And this is crazy too, because I know a lot of divorced people that are also dating other divorced people that have kids. So they're trying to get their parenting time aligned on the same weekends. Do you find that to be complicated? Do lawyers have to get involved with this?
I see that happen more often than not. It's one of those things I was actually going to bring up if you didn't, because it is interesting. You know, it's always hard when, you know, we've got a situation, and it's even more when it's, oh, it's my wife's children that aren't even my children, and now I want to pair them with my children. So now we've got not even half siblings that have to have this family time together. So it creates a really interesting dynamic. So I think if it's your children, obviously, you know, the goal would be is that regardless of whether they're half siblings or not, you'd want all your children to spend time with you at once. The problem really is that the kids kind of feel like I'm sharing you. So it's something to take into consideration that we see that often. The kids are like, but I want to have some alone time with dad. I want to have that quality time. I want to have that one-on-one because, you know, I'm an only child. But in his other family, he has 2 or 3 other kids, and I like them and I want to play with them, but where's daddy and daughter time? And so, you know, they kind of internalize that. They will vocalize it, but it's really hard because everyone wants to have Christmas with all the children. Of course you do. I get that. But you have to think about what the children are going through and whether or not you should put in something that maybe it's even just a dinner. You know, maybe you have your children every other weekend and you have a dinner visit with your first family on Wednesdays, and you have your dinner visit with your second set of family on Thursdays, just again to get that quality time. But again, you keep the same rotation on the weekends. So something like that is something that it makes it difficult for us because, you know, somebody's set in stone and they want this because this is the schedule. But again, we have to look at how are your kids going to be impacted by this, because it's something that, you know, as a parent, regardless of whether you're a mother or father, you want what you want, and I get it, but think about them sometimes.
I think too that when people first get divorced and they're just getting out there and dating, and people maybe don't think about this that often, but as you know, I am divorced recently and out there and dating, and it's like you date other divorced people, but you don't necessarily want to introduce your kid to them. So if you have the opposite schedule of this person you're dating, a lot of times the change of the schedule is not necessarily because you want your kids to get together. You may still spend time with your kids alone on your kid weekends until you like take it to the next level. But you know, you end up having you know, a weekend alone with your new boyfriend, girlfriend, fiance, or whatever. And so like the schedule, maybe it doesn't jibe with your ex's schedule, who's also trying to date other people. And I can just see like the scheduling getting so crazy. And I do want to say, it's like, I mean, you're talking about what it's like to meld those families. And I agree with you. I think having that alone time with your child, like having that, hey, I'm going to take my kid to dinner alone once every other week when we have them. I think that that's super important. And even with married people, like that have like 2 or 3 kids, they talk about the importance of spending time alone with each child, each parent, and just making everyone feel special, not, so that the oldest one ends up doing all the work and the youngest one gets all the attention. And I mean, just because they're young and they can't do anything for themselves. I mean, it's definitely hard with the busy lives we all have, to balance all that. But keeping the kids in mind is super important. So I absolutely agree with you. But so you see a lot of people fighting over the schedules once their relationships changed, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other emotional stuff going on with that too.
There always is. And it's a juggling act for attorneys. We need to know what's your basis. Why are you doing this? Like, what's the motivation? Because if we don't understand it, we're just going to tell you stop. Why are you fighting over this one day? Just who cares? And you really got to articulate something because we don't understand it. We're not in your life. We don't know what's going on. So it's frustrating to the attorneys because it's usually, oh, by the way, my boyfriend has. And I'm like, well, why didn't you just tell me that? Because we're kind of at a loss and we don't understand why we're fighting and why you're not settling for something that seems so simple to us. So it's really important that when you have these situations, they come up, it's the very first thing you should tell us. Because now we understand the motivation, we understand the logic behind it. We can obviously push for it a lot better, but don't leave us out in the dark.
It's definitely so interesting. I was actually reading some articles the other day about how quite often the men move on first and they don't really take the time to process. So a lot of these changes happen very fast for the man, the man in the situation. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that as well, but and I don't want to put anyone down. It's not a downer. Hey, whenever I have a dog die, I've got a new dog the next week. I mean, I know people are different. I'm just saying, I get it. You want to replace that hole in your heart. I mean, what would you say about that?
I think it really depends on where people are emotionally. Did you check out 3 years before you actually got divorced? Did you check out the week before? That's really what's going to end up happening. Was it super duper bitter, that, relationship that, oh my God, I just need somebody that actually is going to look at me and smile at me and not treat me like a piece of crap. So it's that type of mentality that you really got to look at the big picture. I don't think it's a one sex versus another. I think it really depends on when, like I said, when somebody checked out emotionally, physically, or otherwise. And from there, then obviously they're in a different place from the other person. So their time frames as to when they're going to move on is different. It's kind of the same thing where, if you're going through a loss of a loved one, we're going to not say dogs, because I disagree with that. But if you're going through a loss of, your husband or wife, and you're, they're terminally ill, and you've had that conversation, chances are, depending on how emotionally connected you are to that person, you're probably not going to want to date for a long period of time. Where again, if it was sudden, maybe it's just like, sticker shock and you don't really know what to do, so you're fumbling around. It all kind of depends on, again, where that dynamic is and how you're really going to cope with it.
Oh, I agree. I know everybody is different, and usually, I mean, not usually, but like sometimes one party is very surprised by all of a sudden finding themselves single. Like, one of the other things that I saw like in the divorce courses was that, people go through all these different phases, and sometimes they jump back to another phase. And so you're not always on the same phase as your ex, and quite often, most likely you're not. So and then you add the children into it, and it's a whole another ingredient to the big mess. All right. So we've really talked about a lot of interesting scenarios today, I think, and we've touched a little bit on the emotional piece into what goes into these decisions. And I guess before we go, did I miss anything? Is there anything you'd like to tell us about father's rights, or any stories you'd like to share to delineate some of the points that we've made today.
Yeah, I just want to bring up one thing. So I think one of the issues that I don't know if we might have touched upon, but didn't really go into detail, was simply that if I am, if I did have a child out of wedlock, and my name is on the birth certificate, so I was at the hospital, with the mother the entire time. I signed the birth certificate. I'm there. I'm on the birth certificate. I'm acting like a father. Whether I'm co-parenting or not, really doesn't matter. But what's going to end up happening in that situation is you get more rights. That father gets more rights because he's acknowledged that he is the father. So we're going to start out with a very similar presumption as if we were a married couple. So now he's going to start out with joint legal custody. He's going to start out with a lot more rights than the person that says, for whatever reason, I'm not putting my name on that birth certificate, because that person has no rights until he either says he is or a court adjudicates him. So there's a little difference in that that I just want people to be aware of. And I think the other thing is, realistically, again, where are you starting out with? Each one of these things, whether you're obviously a married father, you're going to be filing a complaint for divorce or a complaint for separate support. If you are not married and your name is not on the birth certificate, then you're going to file a complaint to establish paternity. Exactly what it sounds like. I'm not listed anywhere. I need to establish it, whether it be me as the father or me as the mother. We still have the same document to file. And then the other case would be is, again, I acknowledge paternity. My name is on the birth certificate. I'm going to file, again, whether I'm the mother or father, a complaint for custody support parenting time. So there are different complaints in all three of those scenarios that really it's very difficult for a pro se litigant to understand what my rights are, what I need to fill out in forms, how do I proceed with this case, and what do I need to do? Do I need to get that genetic marker test? Do I not need to? Can I just go into court and say, hey, I want custody? What are my rights there? And again, I think you start out on different playing fields. So you need to know where you start so you can figure out where to go from there.
I think that is really great advice. And, it's always great to start off with the rights, though. It's a little bit harder to start that uphill battle once you've said that you didn't want your name on the birth certificate or whatever, than to change your mind. Although I think from all of the discussions we've had in the past, you have said that, really the courts want the father to have that relationship with the child as long as it's an enriching one, and they are going to be forgiving and let the father have those rights in the parenting time if they are going to show that effort.
They are. And I think, one of the things you brought up is, again, sometimes it's the father really wants to sign the birth certificate, but mom either doesn't tell him she's in the hospital, won't tell him where he's in the hospital. She disappears. And, by the time he gets there, the child's already left the hospital. He doesn't know where to go. And so sometimes he really wants to sign the birth certificate, but can't. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not always the dad doesn't want to. Sometimes the dads really want to, and sometimes the moms are like, nope, I'm not putting it, no, not going to happen. And so you're fighting that uphill battle only because mom put you behind the 8 ball, and this is your only recourse to prove, yes, I am the father, but you need to do the complaint to establish paternity. And as soon as you get into court, you go, I'm dad. Here I am. I don't need a genetic marker. Let me have my rights. So just something to be aware of, that, again, it's not gender specific. Sometimes moms are just as bad as dads.
Oh yeah. And you know what? We do spend a lot of time talking about, hey, the guy hid the money and, cheated and like all this stuff. I mean, women cheat too. And, the parenting rights, I think that is positively the worst thing, the parental alienation and trying to go away parenting time from either parent, by using these different strategies and tactics is just an amazingly terrible thing. So I'm glad that, they have you. If anyone has a situation like this, please give Nicole a call, because Nicole has been doing this for over 20 years. How many years is it? We just did an anniversary for you.
We did. You're making me feel old again.
You're young, so stop it.
It's been over 19 years.
Okay, so I'm giving you that extra 6 months or whatever it is. What's the anniversary? Do you know off the top of your head?
June 12th.
June 12th. Okay. All right. So you know, we won't rush your 20.
That's right.
You're almost able to drink as an attorney. And I know that's not something you do, but in any case, so like, thank you so much for giving us the rundown. I feel like I'm gonna have to add some whiteboarded infographics on what we're talking about today because it is so convoluted at times. And so I want to thank you so much for clearing things up. And if anyone does have questions, please pick up the phone and call. They have a free consultation, and you know, at least you'll have answers. And answers, they say knowledge is power, and I think that that's absolutely true. So thanks again, Nicole, for coming on. We are looking forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.